Hi there, I'm Andy Owen. I'm the International Technical Manager for ICL Turf and Landscape, and I'm joined in this presentation by my colleague Henry Bechelet, who's the Technical Manager for the UK and Ireland. We want to present to you here an in-depth look at the extensive and successful trial work that we've done examining the management of Microdochium patch disease on fine turf. Now, this is a presentation that we have both presented previously, most notably at the BTME 2020, but both Henry and I have presented this information at a variety of forums through the year. And so some of you may have seen this before. But we wanted to put this presentation out there so that we could support the short technical update videos that we're releasing at the moment, where we discuss this topic in a variety of segments. And really, we've put this together as a bonus edition, if you like, for those of you that are enthusiasts who perhaps want to supplement the information. So we're going to provide you with a walk through the trials and the data that we've got on the topic. So we're talking about integrated turf management. We're talking about the management of Microdochium patch for fine turf grasses. And our starting point would be a survey that we did of golf course managers in the UK and Ireland, which we found really useful. We asked them a series of questions, one of which was giving them a list of problems or technical challenges and asking them which of these had the most impact on their ability to prepare high quality turf. This was the result, and it was really useful to us. It showed us that in terms of the management of fine turf, the control or management of turf diseases was the most critical. And the course managers were worried very much about how they managed the disease in the landscape of losing chemical actives and with less products to do. So it's a nice takeaway from this. Henry, what else do you take away from these results?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a brilliant survey that we did there, and it's kind of informed quite a lot of what the way in which we think about things. It's tough times out there. You know, the weather conditions, the weather patterns are sort of ideal for the development of some diseases. And there's this kind of background situation of losing actives and all this and the other. So there's a sort of, I suppose it's almost like a great deal of anxiety about how to sort of manage the situation now, but also, what it's going to be like in the future. And so that's why we're here. It's a big problem that we're sort of hoping to sort of deal with. I really like the stuff that's at the bottom of that sort of table, that when at the start of my agronomic career, we'd be talking about thatch control and drainage and all that kind of thing, soil management, moisture management, all this kind of stuff. And, it's almost like we've ticked those off the list, with our management. So it's quite, I think it's a really interesting graph, sort of showing the progress that we've made, but not that we've, there's still big problems occurring at the moment. And the one that sort of we need to try and help with is this whole thing about disease control and how we put our disease management strategies together.
Yeah. And really, this is what it's all about. The outbreak of Microdochium nivale or Microdochium patch disease on fine turf surfaces. This picture was one I took quite a few years back now, but this was on a playing surface, a green that was in play, a very severe outbreak. And it's a nice illustration, really, of how severe Microdochium patch can get. But the story is quite illustrative as well, in that I spoke to the course manager here and said, obviously there's a problem going on. What's wrong? And he effectively said, well, Andy, he said, I have no budget this year, and so I can't afford any fungicides. So really, I have to accept what comes and manage best I can next season on the back of this. And the work we've put together hopefully will show that that's not necessarily the case. And even without resorting to the fungicides which are available and are effective, but without them, there are a number of products that can be used or management strategies that can be employed to help you, improve and look after your surfaces and mitigate the effect of the disease on the surface.
Yeah. I mean that whole sort of budgetary aspect is this year, more than others, is kind of top of the list for people as well. It's tough times, and so that's just adding to the mix, isn't it? But there is a lot you can do, and hopefully, we've explained that in the other videos, but it'll become really clear during the course of this presentation that there is hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, step one would be understanding the disease and how it develops. And at ICL, we continually write articles for the industry and technical updates. Here's one from a few years back, published in Greenkeeper International. And every year we're pushing this content out. Here's one from last year, which links to some of the trial work we'll be talking about today. And so hopefully people find them interesting and can use them to help build their knowledge of the disease and how it develops, which is an important part of understanding the problem and working out how to best manage it. So, from the trial work we've done, and we've done extensive trial work over a number of years, there's a few key points that keep coming up. And so to walk through some of the early work, the first would be to say, it's important to get your autumn nutrition right. If you're going into a high disease pressure period, if you're on a susceptible sward, well, that plant needs to be healthy going into that period. And to keep your plant healthy, there's a big component part, which is about, the nutrition you use going into that period. And we're not talking about putting on, lots of nitrogen, but if the plant is still growing, it needs support in terms of those nutrients going on. And time again, we find that getting your nutrition right through this period really makes a difference.
Yeah, it makes a massive difference, and we find this in every trial that we do. The source and the amount and sort of the timing of the delivery is all important. But in the quiz that we did to support all this, this was one of the questions, because there's still that perception out there that from that sort of maybe gets passed down that, if you apply nitrogen from, beyond September, you're asking for trouble. And all the trial that we've done sort of says if you don't apply nutrient or the right amount of nutrient through the autumn and winter period, that's when you're asking for trouble. In all our trials, in all our disease trials, the way in which we encourage disease is by not applying any fertilizer. And so, obviously it's about doing the right thing, but sort of, and quite often, the extremes are always wrong, and the answer's somewhere in the middle. But yeah, it makes a massive difference in terms of the sort of potential level of disease activity, getting your nutrition right.
Yeah, that's clear from all the work we do. So get your nutrition right. The second one, is really moisture management. Our fungal diseases at this time of year proliferate through that moist leaf surface in the sort of cool, humid conditions that we see. And we did some trial work a number of years ago. I'm sure many of you have seen it, that just showed that by utilizing a dew dispersant or dew dispersant technology through the autumn period, making sure you apply it in the right conditions. Ideally, it needs to go onto a dry leaf surface, needs to go on when the plant, has slowed in its growth. You can disperse the dew off the surface, and that can reduce the outbreak of the disease. And we showed this in some trial work and presented this in a number of figures, but here would be one example. We have outbreak of disease, we have the y-axis, we have time, and two lines on this graph, and the upper line is effectively the development of the disease in our control plots where nothing has been applied. And then the lower line shows the reduction in disease outbreaks that you can achieve just by applying a due dispersant at the right time. And in this trial, we actually applied fairly regularly, maybe 5 or 6 times through that pressure period. And you can see the disease reduction, which is a great result.
Yeah, but only half the story, I suppose. But I mean, we've been through quite a lot of sort of significant journey through all this, and I don't think I appreciated. I don't know why I didn't appreciate it, but the significance of moisture management through this kind of period is kind of huge. But it's we sort of dealt with this in one of the short video clips that the temptation might be that you'd sort of say that it's in some way effective, and of course as a standalone treatment it's not. You've still got 18 to 20% disease developing, really severely affected surfaces with the due dispersal. I mean, it's made a difference, but it's not disease control. But it certainly, it can be helpful as part of a wider ITM strategy.
And yeah, that's right. We did cover this in the short video clip. It's interesting. We can hand on heart say using a due dispersant will significantly reduce your outbreak of disease, and that sounds impressive, but it isn't the full story. Because even a significant reduction can still leave you with a considerable outbreak to manage, and so we need to be putting together a combination of strategies to cope with this.
Yeah, it was definitely that graph there. It's definitely one of the sort of stepping stones there, wasn't it, towards our sort of greater understanding. That was a big moment when we sort of started to appreciate the importance of moisture management, or sort of moisture management on the leaf.
Yeah, exactly right. And then move on the second strand, or the third strand. Sorry, good nutrition, moisture management. Was a potential to use iron effectively. And we've used iron traditionally, iron sulfates, at this time of year very regularly. And the trial work was quite insightful, really, in the use of iron. In that we applied iron. Again, we've got a disease on the y-axis with time. The upper line is the control plots with nothing added. And then we've got 2 further lines on this graph. The red one, or the upper second line, is the application of green master effect iron, so an iron sulfate and chelated iron product applied regularly through that disease period. So going on at sort of monthly intervals through that period. And you can see that we actually, by using iron at regular intervals, have not significantly reduced the outbreak of the disease. But you can see that lower line, this one here, would be just a single application of iron, which was timed a little bit better, and timed really to be applied, at critical time, just as as environmental conditions on the leaf were conducive for the development of the disease. And so by adjusting maybe the way in which you use iron and getting the timing right, again, we can significantly slow and reduce the development of the disease.
Yeah, I mean, this one was also really important for me, really, because, I reckoned I wrote 1,000 agronomy reports, and all of them said, apply sulfate of iron at regular intervals during the autumn period to help harden the sward against disease activity. And that was wrong. You can see that from that graph there. It might have made the turf look darker, but it didn't do anything to help with disease. Every now and again, you might have got lucky. There is that, I suppose. But the reason why I kind of felt that it was important is because that recommendation was something that has been handed down to me and to everyone, I think, really. And it just goes to show that sort of sometimes these kind of these wisdoms that get passed down might not be right. And so this was a brilliant moment to sort of say, yeah, no, sulfate of iron's good, but time it right, rather than just kind of use it willy-nilly. So that was great. I don't mind being wrong as long as I'm right in the end. And this graph sort of proved me 1,000 times wrong, really. But I'm big enough to accept that now that we've got this kind of better understanding.
Yeah. And you can see the way this research is developing, good nutrition, managing moisture on the leaf, using iron. And then the next step was looking at combination of products. And this was another step change in terms of the research. We ran a trial. This one was carried out at the STRI, where we actually were looking at surfactant combinations, but with a range of biostimulants as well. But there was a set of data within this trial which really stood out. And that was the use of surfactant combinations to manage moisture in a better way. And so, another graph where we see disease at the vertical axis with time. The top line, again, was the development of disease in the control plots with no treatments being applied. And then a series of lines under that. And the upper line was the use of a penetrant wetting agent over the top. H2Pro Flow Smart, a penetrant wetting agent to remove moisture from the surface of the root zone. But you can see that we get a slight suppression of disease outbreak, but not really significant. The line below that is the use of dew dispersant. Yet again, I think this was the third year we showed that you can get a significant reduction in disease just by using a dew dispersant. But what really stood out was this lower line here, and this was a combination of dew dispersant going on to the plots and a penetrant wetting agent going on to the plots. And that combination of taking the moisture off the leaf and reducing the moisture away from the base of the plant, away from the canopy, had an summative effect which reduced disease even more.
Yeah, really, really, really important. Because we put the penetrant in there, didn't we? Because I think, well, if moisture's so important, maybe other surfactants could work, and the penetrant on its own really didn't. But then, when you use them together with the dew dispersant, that line there is just amazing in terms of how. Almost like how combinations of treatments can work, that they compound each other, that you sort of roll the droplet off the leaf, you slow the rate of development of disease down to a certain degree, but then it's probably not even the case, but then you sort of keep water moving through the soil profile with the penetrant. You create an even less conducive environment for the development of the disease. I just want to say at this point, Andy, is that that was part of the biostimulant trial. As there was biostimulants going on as well. We've tested loads and loads and loads of other stuff that hasn't worked, and I think maybe we need to do a presentation on that. That would be really quite good. Just because people throw so much stuff at it. But we sort of almost like we distilled it down, didn't we, into those kind of three things that sort of get the nutrition right. Moisture management seems to be really powerful. So employ moisture management techniques and the well-timed use of iron sulfate are the kind of three things that if you put together, this is what sort of came out of the early stuff, then maybe you're onto something in terms of truly effective non-fungicidal sort of background management strategies.
And I've just made a note. Maybe later in the autumn, we'll look at a presentation of all the treatments that don't necessarily give you a benefit.
It's important that one. It's important that, Andy, I think.
And there are quite a few.
Yeah, yes. You'd be surprised.
Okay, so that leads us in well, Henry. Obviously, we took these learnings into another trial. This was done at the STRI, where we combined products together, and there was a lot of treatments going on in this trial. And I'm only going to pick out one or two bits, but really here, you can see we have control plots with absolutely nothing going on. We then have our T2, which is essentially a fungicide program to manage the disease in that way. And then we could contrast that with T7, which we've put together as our integrated program without fungicides. which is based on those learnings, which is good nutrition, Share-Form GTK step going on at a fairly low rate, which is a slow release nitrogen source. We have utilizing penetrant wetting agent and dew dispersant, utilizing iron sulfate, and also there's another product in the mix there, which is Vital Nova Stress Buster, which essentially is a small amount of iron and a little bit of nitrogen going on in a liquid regularly through
Well, it's actually nutrition, iron, and there's a significant amount of surfactant in there as well. So anyway, that's not coincidental.
Yeah, forms part of that program, and we can look at the results from that trial, which again were really eye-opening, nice and successful. Similar graph showing disease outbreak. You can see the line here. Now, in this trial, we don't get as much disease appearing in the control plots. It was, done in a different year, and the disease outbreak is not as severe. We can see this artifact in the middle, this big dip, which was a little cold snap, which just suppressed the development of the disease a little bit. But then we overlay that, what happened with the fungicide treatments, and we can see that they managed the disease well, but we got a little bit of an outbreak there. But then we overlay our integrated program with all those technologies going on, and we got a superb result, a result that showed that at this trial, on this occasion, we managed the disease almost back to zero by integrating these technologies together. So that was a great success, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, really good. But unfortunately, we couldn't talk about the results because we kind of realised two things, wasn't it? That first of all, we've been sort of unfair on the fungicides by not putting any nutrient in there. The fungicide. None of this is ever to sort of bash fungicides. They're really useful, brilliant technologies. But yeah, we were totally unfair on the fungicides. And the other thing, and probably the reason why the untreated control didn't get there's such a high level of disease as in previous years, that it wasn't annual meadowgrass per annual dominated. It was dominated by brown top Ben, and so it had its own sort of host tolerance against Microdochium patch disease, and so we felt that we couldn't shout from the rooftops about these brilliant results. That bottom red line not containing any fungicides but achieving fantastic results, because it was almost like it was a situation that sort of didn't reflect what people were actually looking after themselves. The majority of golf greens in the UK and Ireland would have a significant proportion, will be dominated by annual meadowgrass, and so. Although brilliant, it was probably more an example of sort of integrated strategies or a complete integrated strategy where the grass types were also helping in your regard. But before we move on, I think we do stop at this point in all the other video clips. It's kind of let's not ignore that fact. The grass types are really, really significant. And if you've got beneficial grass types acting on your behalf, as well as, other management strategies that we've sort of described, nutrition, moisture management, and the use of iron, you could be completely effective against the development of this disease. And so, that did come out in the survey that we did, when, the sort of question that we started with about sort of, the most challenging sort of aspects. There were questions that we asked the greenkeepers about what they intend to do in the future, and overseeding was by far the most, the biggest kind of response. Because everyone knows that grass types are, huge when it comes to disease control, and so or disease suppression. And so if people are feeling really anxious and realize disease sort of management is their biggest challenge, of course they're going to start thinking about overseeding. So that's a future, and that's our future challenge to do some work on that area, in terms of establishing grass types.
Absolutely, yeah. And although you say we didn't shout about it, I think I did shout about it a little bit, but I was always honest in the way that the trial was designed and carried out on. But But that made
I mean,
us.
that's what I would do. Sorry, that's what I was doing. I was kind of going, yeah, and then with the same token going, but you can't take these results. You have to take it with a little bit of a pinch of salt. But again, brilliant. That's sort of like that sort of integrated strategy. Such a fantastic result. The integrated techniques, very simple integrated techniques and ideas could be so effective.
But it gave us the impetus to challenge ourselves further and move on. And we didn't stop there. And the following year, we took a similar trial over to a different location. We carried out a trial at the Irish Sports Turf Institute at ISTI, just southwest of Dublin. And went to a trial site that's managed by Mark Sheridan there at ISTI. Mark's a golf course manager. He manages, these surfaces to a very good condition. And we picked the site for two clear reasons. Well, two really, but one would be, it would be a power annua dominated sward. So let's challenge ourselves by looking at how our integrated program would work in those conditions. And two, we knew that in that location, there was a high likelihood of having really conducive conditions for the development of Microdochium.
Yeah, absolutely. And we felt like we couldn't with a sort of clear conscience, talk about the previous set of results. We had to go and challenge ourselves to power annua dominated swards in conditions that really do favour the development of the disease. We're not about sort of pretending or sort of being able to pass off stuff. We want our advice and our recommendations to be completely robust and effective.
Yeah, and the conditions worked out for us. Here we see a figure showing the mean temperatures with the min and max also on, and the red line showing the mean. Really shows that throughout that high pressure microdochium period, we were experiencing temperatures of between 5 and 15 degrees right the way through, with very few cold spells really through that period. So almost optimum for the development of the disease.
Yeah. I mean, this shows you the problem in a nutshell, doesn't it? It was one of the quiz questions, wasn't it? What is the optimum range, or whatever it was? It's between 5 and 15 degrees for microdochium patch. So this is absolutely perfect conditions, but for such a long time. And if we went into February, March, and April, it would just continue. It was monstrous in terms of the temperatures. So perfect. In our challenge.
And then we look at the moisture content there, and actually September, October were around about average, maybe a little bit below that. But then you moved into November and December, and there was some big downpours of rain, and the surface stayed wet almost right the way through that period. And so coupled with those temperatures, a lot of moisture floating around, high humidity, and it creates a perfect situation for the development.
Yeah, for me, it's not the amounts of rainfall, Andy. It's just the constancy. Every day wet leaf, and so again, perfect condition, because even when it's not raining, you can imagine sort of southwest of Dublin, you've got heavy dew forming, with those temperatures being like they were. So it's again the perfect storm, and it carried on. There was January, February, March, April, just the same. It was horrendous in terms of disease pressure.
And so we put together a fantastic trial, I think, on this area where we developed a range of programs utilizing different technologies to see how that affected the development of the disease. And there's lots we could present out of this. We were taking programs based on iron, programs without iron, programs with high potassium, programs utilizing pigments to see the effects they have. But for this webinar, I think for this presentation, let's just pick out 3 of those treatments to contrast. And the first one would be the control plots. Again, The control, as we said earlier, no applications made. It's unrealistic. You wouldn't manage your turf through that period doing nothing, but it allows us to see the natural progression of disease through that period. So we have control plot. We then have a treatment which we would describe as positive control, if you like, where we utilize good nutrition. So here we've got Sierraform GTK step 6027 going on just at the start of the trial. So week 1 in September at a relatively low rate, but that puts on some slow release nitrogen and a big chunk of potassium to feed the plant up through that period. And then follow that by 3 applications of fungicide, 2 applications of Instrata Elite and an application of Medallion. Instrata Elite going on preventatively at the start of the trial, a second application 4 weeks later, and then application of Medallion another 4 weeks after that.
Yeah, it couldn't be simpler. By far the most simplest program. We've been fair on the fungicides this year by putting some nutrition in there with them. But some greenkeepers would just hate that, wouldn't they? Sort of like, that's not greenkeeping. It's the simplest. It's utilising technology. But anyway.
Yeah, that have been developed for that situation.
Yeah.
But then we can compare that with this program here, treatment 4, which would be our integrated non-fungicidal plan. We go on with the same nutrition to start, so that's Sierraform GTK step. We then have regular applications of a tank mix, which is FlowSmart, which is our penetrant wetting agent, and Stress Buster. Like I said, a little bit of iron, some liquid nitrogen going on, a little bit of surfactant in there as well. That will keep the plant ticking along right the way through that autumn period. We then had a few applications of dew dispersant, really timed to go on when growth had slowed, and the leaf would be dry enough to apply them. So I think we only had 3 or 4 applications of that going on. And then a couple. So we weren't applying iron every month. We just had a couple of applications of effect iron, an iron sulfate with chelated iron going on, just timed as to when we would expect to see conditions exactly perfect for the development of the disease.
Yeah, so this is the program that did so well the previous year, and we were putting it to the test. We sort of say that the sort of, obviously there's no fungicide in there. We're calling it ITM, but it's actually a sort of ITM without fungicide program. And I'm sort of saying, we don't have an agenda against fungicides here. We just want to find out sort of how effective these strategies can be on their own. But actually, you look after territories in your international role, Andy, where they don't have fungicides. And so this is highly relevant to a number of your sort of different areas. And who knows, it might be highly relevant for more and more areas if the sort of regulatory pressures continue.
Yeah, looking into the future, you're right. And so that trial, as we said, carried out at ISTE, a properly designed trial. We had 4 replications of each treatment, randomized within block design, reasonable plot size with a buffer strip surrounding each plot. And as we said, on a Poa annua dominated surface, this is a drone photo taken sort of to the middle or the second half of the trial, and you can really see in this image, the disease development and how that happened, in the external areas to the trial and in 1 or 2 treatments within the trial. So it really was a high pressure sort of situation.
Yeah, caught fire.
Really did. And ISTE made a series of measurements for us, relatively straightforward, looking at turf colour, looking at turf quality, measuring NDVI, which is a measure of turf vigour, using a handheld meter, and then assessing the development of the disease as the percentage of the area within each plot affected. And Mark was really exact about the development of disease. Really spent a lot of time getting that right. We can be very confident in the results that he was able to produce for us.
Yeah, he's great at this.
So let's look at a few of the results. So we start off a reminder of the programs and look at the development of turf color. So we have turf color score on the vertical axis with time. This is the line produced by the control plot. And we can see that throughout the trial, there's nothing going on, no iron, no nutrition, and we can see turf color dropping. We would say when you get below a turf color of 5, it would be unacceptable for the turf at that time of year. So the control plots presented unacceptable turf in terms of their color.
Becoming more yellow.
Yeah, becoming moist and more yellow. Then we overlaid that, our positive control. So starting off with some granular, slow release nutrition, and then 3 applications of fungicide in strata relief twice and medallion once. And just that simple program, you can see how the color was maintained through that time period from the nutrition at the start, but also from the fungicide preventing the disease taking hold, so the plant was able to stay healthier through that period.
Yeah.
Simple program. And then we can also look at our integrated non-fungicidal program. The color was much improved in this treatment. We had granular nutrition going on first, the same slow release nitrogen, Seroform GTK step. We had our 4 applications, effectively every 28 days, of penetrant wetting agent with stress busters, so some iron and nitrogen going on in liquid form there, with, I think, a couple of applications of effect iron, which would boost the color as well, and then 3 applications of dew dispersant towards the end of that autumn-winter period.
Yeah, interesting, because quite often the perception would be if you're sort of chasing after turf colour during the autumn and winter period, you really are asking for trouble in terms of disease activity, especially if there's urea nitrogen going on, which there is there. So let's just see what it turned out like. But it's almost like, you can just imagine people sort of, and on the face of it, you sort of think, well, that surely can't work. But no nutrition, iron, and moisture management. That's what we're talking about.
And the colour was strong right the way through that period.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Colour scores of 7.5 and 8 in the middle of winter, really is a strong, a good colour.
Yeah.
So
they're
the results for turf colour for those 3. Obviously, colour's all well and good, but the trial was all about disease. So how did we get on in terms of disease development? So this is our disease graph, with the disease up the vertical axis, disease development with time. And essentially, you can see this disease progression in the control plots that just continued to go up and up. We're presenting here the mean of 4 plots. And so in the mean, we were getting around about 20% of the surface affected by disease, and 20% is a significant outbreak. We can illustrate that. This figure shows 1% of the surface affected, moving up to 5% of the surface affected. When we get to 10%, that's a serious outbreak. And up at 20, a little bit more still, that's a surface really wiped out.
Yeah.
And when we often talk to course managers about what their tolerance is for disease, when we illustrate what 1% of a surface affected is generally, people's tolerance doesn't go much above that. And certainly 5% of the surface is a lot. You'd agree with that, wouldn't you, Henry?
Yeah, no. They always say, so it's a difficult question, but when it says, what's your acceptable level of disease activity, they say 0. There's a 0 tolerance going on with disease. But yeah, 1% sort of, in some eyes might be unacceptable. I think sort of if you get into 5%, you've kind of had a bit of a nightmare. Obviously, it doesn't happen consistently all the way through. But yeah, 5% is basically the sort of threshold for when sort of you're talking about complete failure then.
Yeah, Yeah. And so that would be an image illustration. That's round about 10% of the surface affected by disease. Anyone faced with that would realize they've got a severe problem and a real uphill battle to keep the quality of that surface in check.
Yeah.
And we were getting up to round about 30% on the surface, and that's round about 30% of the surface. So,
yeah, it carried on, didn't it? Maybe we'll talk about what happened after Christmas, because we did continue this trial on, and it's dead interesting. But it carried on because the conditions were so mild during this time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And to put those into graphical form, that's the control plot. The fungicide, the positive control, showed that by giving a little bit of nutrition to that plant at the start, really effective at managing the disease on this susceptible sward in a high pressure year. You can see that it pegged it right back to close to zero. We see that little rise at the end. That was, effectively, that was 6 weeks after the previous application. And there's still a lot of pressure going on. It's not like the pressure ever dropped off. So,
the final fungicide, the medallion was applied sort of, I think it was either the 9th or the 16th of November. So you can sort of see, so that's the final of the 3 fungicides going on there. Yeah, and it just shows you that sort of this relentless pressure that we've got, just carries on and on and on, and you can't let up when there's no frost, and it's just ideal conditions all the way through. It comes back. And so we did actually apply a fungicide immediately after Christmas, because we felt it was necessary. We felt like we were on this, we're all quite familiar about sort of disease rates of increase now, aren't we, with the sort of current COVID situation? But if you don't control it, and the conditions are ideal, it will very quickly start spiraling out of control.
Yeah. And you remember the previous picture that showed that 30% of the surface affected? This was the positive control in December, after all that high pressure. And we got here, a pretty clean surface compared to what's going on around it and in some of the other treatments.
Yeah, it's held its colour as well, and that's a single application of that 6.027 slow release, really. And the fungicides help it hold colour as well. You always see that. But whenever we were visiting this trial site, because I went quite often, I was just really sort of eager to see how it all panned out. When we also took sort of visitors, and I remember taking a sort of group of agronomists there. These were the plots that they loved the most. The advisors. The simplest program producing these kind of results, absolutely. That was their recommendations.
Yeah. And then, so we can look at the data for the integrated non-fungicidal program, and this was a real success. You can see that lower line there. And essentially, what you see, at no stage did we prevent the development of the disease, but we really slowed it down. We slowed down the progression. We slowed down the overall outbreak, and really, really successful, and showed under this high susceptible sward, in these high pressure year, you can really check the development of disease by getting these technologies right.
Yeah, we're not killing disease with any of this. There's no fungicide in there, so we're not killing disease. What we're doing is we're trying to manipulate the environmental conditions or the situation, like with plant health, moisture management, and selective use of iron. It just really does. It's amazing. And at no point did I ever feel, because I was going quite often, did I ever feel that it was unacceptable, that you had to apologise for this. So for your sort of clients, or the people you're giving advice to in the Netherlands or wherever it is that might not have fungicides as freely available, you can take these results and say, look, there's hope. There really is hope in this. There's lots we can do. We're not at the mercy of this disease, but we have to, do everything that we can if we're going to try and keep it in check.
That's right. And there's just the image of the surface from this integrated part. Doesn't quite look as high quality as the fungicide one. We've got this darkening of the sward, but still very acceptable.
Yeah, that's a turf colour score, isn't it? You know, that's a sort of between 7 and 8 or wherever it is. Highlights the moss, doesn't it? But actually, no disease scar in there. There's 1 or 2 little scars in there. But honestly, it put the brakes on it so much, didn't it? It's quite an intensive program, isn't it? I suppose that's the problem with it. And we are looking at that. But no, really, really good. Yeah, obviously, you know, we could start shouting about these results, and this is what we're doing now. We're shouting about these results. Eventually, we come out of the closet and start saying, "Oh, there's loads you can do in the background." Mm.
Yep, exactly right. And so, just to put those 3 together, you know, that was a really successful set of results, and we did measure quality as well. I'm just going to stop there. So, Henry, I'm going to get a bit of feedback off your mic, I think. I don't know whether you could just mute a second. Thank you. And so we also presented a little bit of data, collected data on turf quality. Turf quality showed, as you would expect, it really followed the progression of the disease. Turf quality in the control plots dropped right the way through that period. You know, there's nothing going on there. There's no nutrition. There's no iron. There's nothing to mitigate the development of the disease. So the quality dropped well below acceptable by the end of the year. You know, effectively, that's what you're going to get if you do nothing on this sort of sward through that period. We looked at quality for the positive control, for the nutrition at the start with a little bit of fungicide going on. And that maintained the quality, you know, above 6, so well above acceptable, right the way through the period. And the, turf quality for the integrated program, was a little bit below that. I think that the applications of iron just darkened the sward a little bit, maybe highlighted the little bit of moss that was present in the base of the sward. So the quality scores were a little bit lower. So what I can do now is just present a couple of time-lapse images. So I'm going to start off with just a time-lapse of the way the disease developed in the control plots. And you'll watch this develop. It'll run from September through to the end of December. And you'll really see the way that disease really came in, sort of at that end of October into November, and then you can see that ramping up of disease pressure and how it developed over the plot. So here we go. It's a time lapse of the way the disease developed in the control plots. Clean in September, really good surface, looking pretty clean in October, and then we see that disease coming in through November into December, really disrupting the surface and really taking over. Okay, I'm going to run that again, but essentially that's what happens, or this is what happens if you do nothing. And then I'm going to switch on to the positive control by way of contrast. You can see that disease into December taking over the surface. Now contrast that. Oops, going the wrong way. Contrast that with the next slide, which is our positive control, which is our nutrition and fungicide. Staying clean right the way through the season. I'm going to run that again. Simple program, bit of slow release nutrition, 3 applications of fungicide.
Yeah, it was that November period that the control plot just went crazy. Have a look at it. It's just genius, isn't it?
Yeah,
beautiful.
Absolutely.
The quality and the colour, no disease.
Yeah, it really illustrates that management of the disease through that period. And then the third one, if you remember those two, this is our non-fungicidal integrated program. through the same time period.
Okay, so this is the toughest test we've ever put the turf under. That November period, look, maybe a little bit of activity there, but didn't jump in, did it?
Going to run that again. Yeah, little bit of activity coming into that end of that period, as we can see, creeping up to a few percent of the surface affected, but essentially a really successful program, as we say, under that susceptible for high pressure period.
Well done, Andy. Is what I would say. That is Andy's trials, always Andy's trials. It's been brilliant, just employing our understanding and knowledge with simple strategies to create a less conducive environment. Sometimes we get sucked into graphs and we don't actually have any concept of what the actual real situation was like. So those time-lapse images are just brilliant, aren't they? Put everything into context.
We can show, this was the option one, the control plots. If you do nothing in that sort of situation, you can have a good sward into September, thinking you're doing well, but come December, your surface is completely wiped out. And that isn't an option for people managing this sort of turf under these sorts of pressure environments. Second option, pick a simple program, slow release granular nutrition, in the autumn, not a lot of nutrition going on there, and then picking the fungicidal technologies to support you, applying them preventatively, and you move on to a pretty clean surface at the end of December.
Pretty clean. Oh my goodness, it's no difference.
Yeah. And then we have our integrated program without fungicides, again, clean at the start, moving through to December. We can see the darkening of the sward a little bit from the added iron, but essentially, you've got to be happy with that, with a non-fungicidal approach.
Delighted.
So where does that lead us? Well, if we're talking about integrated turf management in general, three key tips would be, select the right technologies for you to use through that period and understand them. Have an understanding of the disease you are managing and how it comes in and affects your site. And then I would say, plan your integrated program. We're talking about an integrated turf management program, not just an integrated disease management program. So these aren't individual sprays to manage the disease. There are a whole series of technologies and practices that can be put in place to help manage through that period.
A really important point, Andy, that is, I think, because we've almost like we've glossed over that fact where we sort of say, get your nutrition right, moisture management, and use iron. But actually, no. It's kind of like maintain plant health with appropriate nutrition throughout the sort of autumn and winter period, not overdoing it, not undercooking it or whatever. So you have to select the right technologies there. Then your sort of moisture management strategies are going to be dependent on conditions. So you have to be really sort of alive to the situation. And you have to keep monitoring your turf if you're going to sort of time those iron applications properly. So it's not sort of, those three things just without thought. You have to, as a course manager, be constantly alive to the situation, but, ready to go almost to reach the shelf and go with the next thing when the opportunity presents itself. This isn't by numbers. This is the skill and the art of greenkeeping that we're talking about.
Yeah. And, a few other sort of take-home messages. An interesting thing for you to think about, what is your tolerance for disease on your surface? What's your own tolerance of your club or your members or your owners? Which will help you decide what sort of strategy you take, whether there is a tolerance there or whether you have zero tolerance and want completely clean surface. Your approach will need to change a little bit. Second one would be, current fungicides that are available for use in the UK and Ireland are effective at managing Microdochium through this period. We can contrast the control plots with our, simple nutrition fungicide program. We're talking about a susceptible sward in a high pressure area. They really did a good job.
Yeah, we talked about this with Glenn, didn't we? The problem that we've got is that the fungicides that we've got left are different than the fungicides that we've just lost, and that we sort of, we sort of relied upon so much. The timings were more, you were able to apply the old fungicides in a more reactive way. You can't do that with these materials. But I mean, that fungicide, that positive control, could not be simpler, could it? It was kind of 3 fungicides applied at regular intervals. But it has to be that they're preventative, and so they really do work. Just don't have the same, head on that you had, that you deployed when you were using the old fungicides. You have to get your head round the sort of latest technology. You can't be lazy with that.
Yeah, exactly right. And then we could also say a couple of things, be aware of leaf wetness and try and manage that, utilize surfactants to disperse dew when conditions allow, put a penetrant wetting agent program in place just to try and push that moisture away from the crown a little bit further. We've shown on a number of occasions that that's a successful strategy to employ. Make good use of iron, liquid applications of iron sulfate. You don't need to just apply them on a regular basis through that period, but pick your applications to get the most benefit from them. Here we were just using a 5% iron sulfate, at 30 litres a hectare, really made a big difference for the progression and development of the disease. And the third one would be that nutrition, keeping your plant healthy. In this trial, remember, we're talking about a susceptible sward in a high pressure year. We added 15 kilograms of N in the autumn as a granular slow release N with 50 kilograms of potassium, with an additional 10 kilograms of N applied as a liquid through that period. And we were managing the disease. That was not causing the disease to flare up or increase in outbreak. It was being managed by those nutritional inputs. So that's important.
Yeah, there was some, we haven't talked about all the sort of different treatment patterns, but there was some plots that were just nutrient, that case step, that methylinurea-based fertilizer, on its own, just applied at a monthly interval. Okay, it wasn't realistic, but throughout the period, it did pretty well, didn't it? On its own, without any integration whatsoever, did go above that 5% kind of threshold. So on its own would be regarded as being a failure. But just it shows you, it showed us, that it's so important to get nutrition right, and not to be dismissive of it. That is the worst mistake you can make is the equal worst mistakes that you could make are overfeeding your turf, quite right, but underfeeding is just as much of a sin, if you're trying to manage disease activity. And when you sort of get it right in the right area, it's really, really powerful.
Yeah, works really well. And I think one of the messages you would have got as you were listening to that and watching, we have lots more data to present. We have data on a number of different integrated strategies. We've got data on biostimulants and biofungicides, trying to slot those into the program. I think because you can see we've not presented them here, we haven't always been very successful with those approaches. But it would be nice to show you what we've done and present the differences that we see with those products incorporated. And we have more data.
Well, yeah, you're hinting quite heavily there that we didn't do very well with them. But I just kind of think that also, as we go and learn and actually, expecting things non-fungicide or sort of controls to work well on their own is unrealistic. But when you put them in an integrated strategy, then all of a sudden they can contribute. So maybe, we don't want to be unfair on these technologies. We're still looking at them, but we're almost like the learning curve with those is almost like learning how to use them, learning how to integrate them properly. And so, we've got to talk about all this stuff.
We have more data from this trial based on disease management in late winter. This trial went on past Christmas through that late winter into spring, and gave us some more really interesting data there, linked to how we recover the poor plots in the spring with early nutrition. So that would be good to present as well, that recovery from the disease going into the spring. But I think we've covered everything we wanted to present there, Henry. I think that's about it. I just look, I've got any questions on this slide, but we're not going to get any questions.
Right, Andy, I've got a question.
Yeah.
Do you think anyone got to the end of this presentation without falling asleep? Well done to you all. If you're still listening here, we know that it was a kind of long run through. So the reason why we didn't put it out as a sort of as a main part is because it's quite a lot of information there. But you can see also, hopefully, the reason why we wanted to talk through it all, because there's some really good stuff there that you need to sort of integrate into your own mind. I'm going to leave it to you, Andy, because I'm off.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Hopefully people found that interesting. I can appreciate that some of you will have seen that data previously, but hopefully the data has been presented for anyone who's picked up our short technical updates and wanted to know a little bit more. Our emails are on the screen, so if you do have any questions, feel free to send us an email and ask. And please keep your eyes and ears open for future editions. We've got some good ideas for continuations of this topic later on in the winter, and a number of other topics in the early new year. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and keep up the good work, Andy, and we'll catch up with you later.